Hello, Andrea, and welcome to GoCast.
Hey, Julian. Thank you. So great to be with you.
Well, it's an honor for me to host you today on the podcast. I'd like if you don't mind, just tell us who you are, what you do, where you come from, and then we can get started.
My name's Andrea Waltz. I'm a professional speaker, sales trainer, online sales expert, as it were. And I'm based in Orlando, Florida, here in the United States. And I fundamentally teach people in every business and industry how to think and feel and react differently to rejection so that they can be more successful, so that the no's that they encounter don't stop them.
Okay. Well, thank you for the intro and maybe a little bit of context for the attendees here. Basically, I was reading books by summer. I have a couple of things that I'm going through, and then eventually I stumbled upon your book, which is Go for No. It's a very short book, but a very insightful book. It was really a revelation for me to read this book. It came to a very good window for me where, I've been in sales for more than 15 years now. And I must admit, I realized that I have zero issue getting a no. I'm always going for that by design, but I feel like it's not something natural for everyone. And I'd like to hear where that idea came from for you to write that book. And I think there's a sequel, right?
Yes. So the book Go for No, and the subtitle is really important. Yes is the destination, no is how you get there. So this is a book about a mindset, about having the mindset that if you want more yeses in your business, in your life, that you need to be willing to hear more no's. That the two are not opposites. They're opposite sides of the same coin. So the book, as you were saying, it's a short fable. It's about a guy who wakes up one morning in a house that he discovers, and this is kind of a little bit supernatural, he discovers belongs to a wildly successful 10 years in the future version of him. And together, today him, who's kind of a mediocre salesperson, and this very successful version of him have all of these conversations to try to figure out how this other version of him got to be so successful. And the secret, as it turns out, was this whole idea of go for no. And we pretty much wrote the book. My co-author is my business partner, my husband, Richard Fenton. There's a story in the book about when he was selling suits for a living and how he was selling, and everything he showed the customer said yes to. The customer never said no to anything. And his district manager asked him, well, if the guy never said no to anything, how did you know he was done shopping, right? How did you know he was done buying? And one of the revelations in the book is that the customer was probably going to continue buying, but it was really the salesperson in that scenario that shut the sale down because he never heard the word no technically. And so that story actually happened to Richard, my husband, and it was one of the things that we taught. Our background is in retail, and so we would teach retail sales. To a customer, you greet them, you start asking them questions, you help them pick out things, whether it's furniture or clothing or cars or whatever. That was our background, and people loved that story. And so we decided to create this book and create a parable around it so that people could kind of see themselves in the position of being that salesperson. And by the way, Julian, I have to tell you, I was very much like you. Like, I felt like I didn't have a problem hearing the word no, but then I had to get honest with myself, because even though I thought I was a pretty decent salesperson, like in my own mind, I thought I was pretty darn good, I realized that I did a lot of times prejudge what I thought somebody would do or what I thought they would be willing to spend. And so I wouldn't show certain things or ask certain questions just to protect myself from getting that no.
Well, and I think there's two things in the book. First, you're comparing with a kid, right? They're asking, and they don't mind getting a no because they know that eventually, while they ask, they will get that yes, right? It's hard to keep on saying no to your kid asking for ice cream or whatever. You'll eventually say yes, and they know that by design. And somehow along the way, we unlearn this. So that's a super interesting part. And the other one is, I don't think you touched on that in the book, but it's similar. We don't know, for me, how much is too much. Meaning, like, is $10 a lot of money? No. $100 is a lot of money. Well, I might say yes, but the other person might not say yes until he hits 1 million, right? So most of the time we send a pricing to a client thinking like it's too expensive, but in fact, for them, it's not. or it is, right? So,
Totally. That's one of the biggest lessons that we hope people walk away with Go for No. And you're right, we don't go deep into that. It's one of those things that you kind of have to glean from the story. You pull out the lessons from the story and what resonates with you. The whole idea of the selling of the story of the guy selling suits is that he had a mental spending limit in his head. And that
mhm,
in the book, it's like $1,000. It would probably be the equivalent of spending maybe 5,000 today.
yeah.
And so for him, that was a lot of money. So when the customer had said yes to $1,000 worth of things, he figured that that sale was over. Like, why would anyone spend more than that? And so we all have these mental spending limits. And one of the fun things that we do when we speak live and in our workshops is we ask the audience to shout out numbers of how much they spend for dinner, like on an anniversary, how much they spend on, like, if they would buy a sound system for their house. And it's funny because you hear people shout out different things and everybody's numbers are different because everybody spends differently. Some people will buy $900 shoes. Some people buy $9 shoes. They think that's
Mhm.
crazy. We're all different. And so the answer to how you deal with that is you have to stop using your own limitations and charge what you believe is the value for what you are delivering, and then let the customer decide whether that's too much and then go from there.
And in your perspective, does that come with like a certain confidence, like the person having to go through a different set of limits, like being very confident about it?
First of all, I mean, it has a lot to do with how you feel and what you believe about
Mm,
what you're selling, right?
yeah.
So if you feel like your product or service is too expensive and you feel like it's not delivering the full value for what you're charging, then yeah, you're going to struggle because in the back of your mind, you're going to think like this isn't worth it and they could get it so much cheaper. And
Mm,
I don't know about you, but like sometimes I've had salespeople tell me like, go somewhere else for this one thing. You don't need to buy this from us. You can get this cheaper somewhere else. And you think, wow, like, so they don't believe in it. So you've got to believe in what you're selling and price appropriately. But this
yeah.
is really tricky for entrepreneurs because I think oftentimes entrepreneurs will charge less
Yeah.
and they don't see their value. So to your point, yeah, you've got to have the confidence to say, here's I am valuable. Here's all the expertise I bring. Here's what the outcome will be. And so when you're able to articulate that, then you can stand by your price. If you can't articulate that, then it becomes more difficult.
That is super interesting. You decided to do a second book.
Mhm.
How did that happen? And how far it is from the first book?
So far, it's
Yes.
25 years later,
Wow.
right? So Go for No, we wrote 25 years ago. We finally wrote the sequel, and in the sequel, it's a whole different story. It's also a parable, and in this story, we have the guy from the first book. We have his daughter, who's
Okay.
like 20 years old. She just graduated. She doesn't know what she wants to do, so her dad from the first book says, well, why don't you go into sales? And she says, well, sales is sleazy. Why would I want to do that? What we have is a kind of a metamorphosis, and we see this character, this young girl who thinks sales is sleazy, but also lacks a lot of self-belief. She's not sure she can do it. And so in the book, we kind of have these different situations. We put her in different situations where we see her grow and we see her change her mindset about some of these things. And the reason we wrote the sequel was really to deal with all of the things that we had heard from people all these years, people who read Go for No, and we get to hear their hesitation and their fears and what's holding them back. So we
Mm.
used the sequel as a way to deal with some of those things.
Oh, that's super interesting. And is it as short as the other book is, or?
It is. It's just a little bit longer, but we tried to keep it short and we try not to add a lot of fluff. We want to just have a story where people can see
Yeah.
themselves in the characters. Just like if you were watching a TV show, how you kind of put yourself in the place of characters. We
Yeah.
want people to see that and have that emotional connection of what would I do if I were in this situation? And also I have the same fears, hesitations, hangups, whatever.
Yeah. No, and having a short book, I think is super interesting because attention span nowadays is shorter and shorter. So it's super nice to read the book in a like an afternoon. So yeah, thanks for that. By the way, I'm a big fan of your books. Everything shifted between the 20 years, and especially after COVID. Now we have
Yeah.
to sell through a camera. What do you think about that? Do you feel like it's totally different or the same? It's the same work, just differently. How do you approach that?
Certainly, the landscape has wildly changed from when we wrote the first book to today. You're right that we had the pandemic. We sell now virtually a lot of the time. And also, just prospecting, we send out far more emails, direct messages, and things than actually picking up the phone and having to call people or going to people's offices and meeting them. The thing that I've is that the fears that we have as humans, the fear of what is this person going to think? How are they going to react? Don't matter when the technology changes. Those fears are still the same. So whether you're selling in person or on camera or even sending an email, people generally still have the same hangups. And so from our standpoint, we work on mindset, which is developing the courage and really building that courage and confidence in order to face the rejection that is going to be out there. Let's face it, that's the reality. You're not going to close every deal. In fact, statistically, you will close 30%, maybe 10% of the people that you end up having a meeting with and end up getting to the point where they're like, yes, this looks interesting. So in sales, closing rates are very low. So you have to accept, not expect, but you have to accept that rejection is part of the process. And so that's really how we come at it. And so the technology is changing and definitely things are tougher and there's more decision makers, especially in a B2B environment, but your mindset and your mental toughness that's required has not changed.
True. Yeah. And the emotional part is still there. It's the same people dealing with people, and that is not changing. You're absolutely right. Do you have any plan on a third book, or are you going to wait another 20 years? Or
Yeah, I know. I will probably wait another 20 years. We did release a book that isn't as well known as Go for No or Go for No the sequel, and that book is called When They Say No. And that looks more at what do you do when someone finally says no to you? How do you interpret that? And it's very much dealing with your emotional response. And also, what are the things that you can say, right? Can you turn that no into a yes? And in some cases you can. In some cases, it's what can you learn from it, right? Maybe you weren't talking to the right person. Maybe you don't have the right messaging. So it's all of the things to think about when you're getting a lot of no's, because that's one of the big questions we get. Like, what do I do if I'm just getting a ton of
Mhm.
no's over and over?
Yeah,
Well, you've got to look at your approach. Make sure you're talking to the right people. Change up your messaging. Practice is just a huge thing in sales, right? I mean, the more you do it, the better you get. And I think sometimes people forget that.
that's absolutely true. You're right. Training and training is trying, right? As well. Like you just have to do it and that's it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
like, even the context of this conversation of today, I applied exactly what you said, right? You commented on my post and then I asked you, would you be willing to come to the podcast? And you could have said no or didn't answer, but I went for that no potentially and got a yes. So I mean, I think it's an example right there, right?
It's a perfect example. And that's what we call, Julian, a go for no moment. So you had a moment where you weighed the two options. Should I do it and just not have to worry about her not responding and not feeling bad or awkward or anything? Or should I go for it? And then that would benefit both of us, right? And so in those moments is when people need to take action. And so I'm obviously so glad that you did. And that really requires that go for no mindset, is in those moments to take the action rather than talk yourself out of it.
Yeah. AIC time is flying. Where can we buy the book? What else are you offering? I understand workshop, speaking engagement. How can we reach out to you?
I recommend everybody come to goforno.com. We've got a fun quiz you can take. It's free. It's a little assessment for how you think and feel about hearing no. So that's the best place to start. And also our books on Amazon, on all of the Amazon platforms in every country. And so I think if you Google Go for No, you'll find it pretty easily.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Andrea, for your time. It was an absolute honor. And I wish you best with your book and the engagement. And thank you again.
Thanks so much.